They live figuratively in the shadows of their parents and their culture and their peer groups, and they conform and they continue to do so until sometimes they have a midlife crisis, or the facade falls away and what's underneath is exposed. And then they're forced to kind of step back and somewhat rebuild from a more authentic, genuine, real place. We spoke about the difference between mudarat and mudahana, how being kind and courteous towards people that you may actually not have a good opinion of is not necessarily being fake, but it's living in alignment with your principles. Whereas when you begin to bend the truth in order to keep people happy, to convince them that you like them, even though you don't actually like them, this is known as mudahana, and this is forbidden in our religion. But to be kind and good to people that you may not actually like is a virtue. It's a good thing. You're not being fake. Why? Because you're not doing it to deceive them. You're doing it from a place of principle, which is my character, and the character that I strive to embody is one of treating people with goodness and kindness, even if I may not necessarily like them. And this is known as mudarat, and this is a virtue. And we shared a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated that. The last point that I had left out, and I said I'd start with today, inshallah, we'll cover it and then we'll move to the next topic. I wanted to touch upon how performative living initially was restricted to the human being's physical body. So if I was going to be performing my life rather than living it and being present in it, but it was more of a performance, I'm just performing for everybody in all situations, then I would do it through my physical body. Today, we have an added platform through which we can perform, and that is social media. And this is what Lawrence Scott, the cultural critic, he terms the fourth dimension of the human being. Previously, humans were three-dimensional, walking through life, and now you have this fourth dimension where you also get to put a presentation of yourself out into the world. And so we're not just concerned about how we present in person, we're concerned about our online presence. And for many of us, it's a very important part of how we present ourselves. Scott describes modern life as one in which a moment can feel strangely flat if it exists solely in itself. I think that's such a wonderful description of trying to enjoy the moment without capturing it. He says when you do that, when you just try to experience life and you don't pull out your phone to record it, take a picture, to do something with your phone to capture it in that fourth dimension, he says the moment can feel strangely flat if it exists solely in itself. And think about that. How often in a moment that's important, meaningful, does your mind go to, should I record this? Should I take a picture? Let's say you catch yourself and go, no, I'm not going to do that. You can't deny that very often your hand goes to your pocket. It's almost like something's missing. I can't just be like experiencing this raw, right? Like I need there's this kind of tendency we have. And that's another dimension. Social media is arguably a near perfect example of performative living. And I've previously talked about how we're now going, or we've gone to a direction, many people have at least, where they're tired of the curated, picture perfect posts. So now there's this push for posting life as it is, which itself is a performance, by the way, which people have come to realize. So people will not post the wonderful food, but they'll post the aftermath of the food, right? Like the plates and the pots that are all clean now. Um, they'll post something that's, again, not the most flattering, but hey, I'm being real. But it's also a performance of being real. It's also a performance of being real. And so even the personas we try to create, um, ask yourself, who are you online? How do people perceive you online? And you would notice that much of what people might perceive you as is intentional. You've chosen and made strategic decisions to present yourself in that light. What do you write in your bio? What's your profile picture? Right? Which picture? Work related? Family? Fun? Is it activism? Is it no profile pic? Because we're like super mysterious, right? What is it? What's in the bio? What do you include? Do I include my age? Why would I do that? Am I trying to convey to people how old I am? Why might they be interested in how old I am? Maybe they're looking to get married. We won't say it, but we have our reasons. Do I put all the flags of the countries I've traveled to highlight that I'm a traveler and I want people to know I'm a traveler? No, I'm not. These are not critiques. I'm not critiquing people for doing this. In some capacity, we all are aware that online, the way we present ourselves, people will form some impression. And so we're intentional about it. And then the posts that we actually post, right? It's so interesting because in the world, you present yourself, you might not always get feedback. You might not always get it, especially negative feedback, because, people don't want to offend you. Online, you post something, and I remember someone telling me that they posted something and it only got 17 likes. So I just deleted it. And it's interesting, right? Because it goes to show we're performing. We want feedback. The audience is watching. I'm putting something in front of them. Like it's almost like a show, a play, a movie. You put it out and you wait for the critics' reviews. And the critics are all of the audience, the people who follow you or don't follow you and just come across it. And if you get positive feedback, you feel good. You go viral. You say, I want to replicate this. This becomes my niche. I just talk on this topic all the time because I realize I've found an audience and it seems to resonate. And it's really interesting when you meet someone who in person is very different than they are online. You ever seen that? Because you start to wonder, what's going on here? Who are you? Online, you're very vocal, out loud. You speak out against this, that. When I meet you, you're really quiet. Which one are you? Are you just keeping it quiet when I meet you in person? Or are you just being a lot more loud than you are online? Which one is it? And it's hard to read. And so the likes, the shares, this is the feedback we're getting on our performance. And a lot of us, if we're honest, do see it that way. If something doesn't land, we don't post it again. Right? It doesn't land, it didn't get any likes, people skipped. And we start to curate our performance. All of this is a sign of what? It's a performance. It's a performance. And social media is a near perfect example of performative living. Again, if you're going to say, well, Sheikh, what's the alternative? I don't think there's an alternative per se. It's going to be a performance. The question is, will that performance align with your values? Or will you be trying to present yourself as someone that you're actually not? That if someone were to meet you in real life, they would not see you that way. That they would be so confused because there's a large disparity between online presence and in person. Right? So there's an inherent performative nature to it. How does one address this? Number one, by being more intentional in aligning it with their values. And I want to introduce you to a concept, and I'll leave it at that because you could speak a lot about this. And there are people out there speaking about social media presence and what's real and who's real and what should we be believing about people who post. How many of you have heard of the philosophy digital minimalism? Anybody? Okay, nice. So I want to explain it very briefly. I think it's a really um, it can be very useful if someone applies it in a meaningful way. It's taken from minimalism itself and just applied digitally. The idea is that you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support things that you value. And then you happily miss out on anything else. And so one way some people do this is they start from scratch. It's like physical minimalism. Some people, I remember reading about one pioneer in the minimalism kind of movement. He went home. He took a sheet and he put it over, like he took sheets and he put them over everything he owned in his house. Every single item, covered it in a sheet. And then he started living his daily life. And every time he needed something, he would take off the sheet. And then a month in, he realized some things still have the sheet on. And 3 months in, they still had the sheet on. And he realized what? I don't need these things. It's been 3 months and I haven't had a single moment where I needed to use that object. And so he got rid of them. And that was his way of going from living with excessive material possessions to like living with the bare minimum requirements for me to function in my daily life. So people apply this to the digital world where you delete all apps. And then one by one, as you realize that there's value, that it's actually something I need and I cannot do without, and you come up with your values and your philosophy of how do you want to use social media, or just my laptop or um, my phone, and accordingly you start introducing one by one in a very intentional way, not by convenience. Many of us have done it by convenience. It's just there's an app for this, just download it, and it just crams. We follow pages least interacted with. We have like 100 people there or 100 accounts there, least interacted with. We never even look at them at this point. Why do we allow it to populate our feed? And we're wasting time scrolling through it when we're not interested in it anymore. Maybe at one point we were. So digital minimalism is the idea. You begin with your values. What's important to me? Because technology is not meant to dictate new desires. It's really meant to support you in what you already value. And so you digitally declutter, and one by one you add back tools, seeing if they align with your values. And if they don't, you eliminate them again. And then the most important point, why do we do this? It's not just to be different, to be contrarian to the culture. No, it's because you want to free up time to do meaningful and important things to you. So you need to have alternatives that you can go out and actually do with your life. That currently these less meaningful apps and activities are taking up time. And that way you can live more heartfully in life because you're not just busy performing online in various different ways. You are out in the world, living your life in alignment with your values. Does this make sense? And if you don't have alternatives, understand that the digital world will pull you back. Because a lot of us turn to the digital world to fill silences and to attempt to reach an equilibrium when it comes to our emotional states. Because whenever we're uncomfortable, and this is a really, I think, important observation that psychologists have made, which is that we procrastinate, for example, not because we're lazy, as much as it's because we can't tolerate negative emotions. When you sit down to get something done, the thought of how much work it's going to take, all the thought process, all the work, the time, the energy, it just feels like so much. You don't break down your work into like manageable pieces. You don't set yourself a limit like a timer. It just feels like I have this huge mammoth project in front of me. And that just elicits negative emotions. And once we feel that in our bodies, we want to return to a state of homeostasis. So we pull out our phones and we go back on and start scrolling. It's trying to strike a balance. The way to address that is to stay in the fire of the negative emotion. You know it's uncomfortable, but you say, no, I'm going to get used to doing difficult things. I'm not going to flee. The moment it gets a little bit boring, it gets a little bit too, cognitively demanding. I'm not going to flee. No, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do the hard thing that needs to be done. And that's what actually makes you feel better afterwards. When you start making progress in the actual work, even if you stop 20 minutes later, you feel good. The ball's rolling. I have something down on the page. I have some ideas. As opposed to when you switch away and you scroll, sure, in the moment you feel a little bit better, but when you come back, you're back at square one. You haven't made no progress. You don't actually feel good about yourself. And then many of us, with our dear friend, the inner critic, will shame ourselves and say, look at you wasting time. You look at you, what's wrong with you? Look, we haven't even done anything. We said we're going to study today. Look at us, we're not studying. We're wasting our time. Again. You want to talk about being a person of discipline? Get out of here. And we shame ourselves. And then we don't actually get anything done because now you feel negative about that. So you pull your phone out again. It's a terrible cycle. But just being aware that you don't procrastinate merely because you're lazy. It's the inability to tolerate discomfort and negative emotions. Now, I want to switch to a really, really critical topic. And the more I think about it, the more I feel we might have to spend 2 sessions on this, so next week as well. It is one of the tools that we would use to live with heartfulness. If we go back to living with heartfulness and understanding it as living with an openness to the entire spectrum of human experience. Not only are we open to other people, to the world around us, to the realities, to the world as it is, but also to spiritual realities. And all of that, my daily orientation towards life takes into consideration all of that. One of the tools to be able to do that, and it's probably a really important tool for many of us here, is learning to develop compassion. Now you might say, how does that correlate? Why is it that compassion would be needed? And I'm going to try to define compassion in more accurate and like specific terms, lest we think it's just some fuzzy vibe, just kind of feel good about. No, there's a very technical way in which I'm trying to use the word here. To be compassionate. And I'll try to explain why that would be such an effective tool to living with heartfulness. To understand why the tool is so valuable, we have to understand the problem that this tool would address. Which, the issue that's forcing us, or causing us rather, to not live so openly, with an openness to experience, with a heartful orientation, but it's causing us to kind of close up in the way that we go through life. It's the painful nature of life. When we look around, we can't help but notice that there's a lot of suffering in the world. And I'm not saying anything profound here. Every one of us just knows this to be a reality. We see broken hearts. We see shattered dreams. We see grief. We see betrayal. We see oppression. And when you witness it and you actually face it, it can feel overwhelming. Think about in the most simple of examples. Any of you ever seen something where someone was in pain and you couldn't look? You saw it, you go, You saw it, you scrolled quickly. You couldn't look at it. Why is that? You can't bring yourself to see it. Now, the examples I'm giving are a little bit extreme because usually when we turn away, it's because of something really graphic and maybe a little gruesome. But even when you see a situation where there's a little child crying in agony and pain, you're just trying to watch a random YouTube video and then the ad pops up and it's a child crying. The charities use it sometimes. And you feel guilty because you quickly like close it, like you wait for the skip ad and like boom. Because you can't listen to those cries. You can't look at that body, right? You can see the ribs of the child. It's so difficult. So but then a part of you is like, but I should bear witness to the suffering. But you can't do it. So you quickly skip it. Then you feel guilty watching your video. It's like a really interesting tactic that charities use, right? You're kind of like, come on, guys. I'm just trying to watch a video. You're popping up a difficult ad like that. And so, what do we do when we feel overwhelmed by the pain and suffering? And I'm just talking about external, but what about internally? The moment you start thinking about things that you need to work on, you just feel overwhelmed. And so you quickly just, distract yourself. All of this is a form of closing yourself off to reality as it is. Because reality itself is too painful. Think about that. That's what we're doing. We're limiting what we are willing to experience and witness because it's too painful. Right? You ever had to leave a room where it's too emotional? Everyone's just crying. It was a really emotional moment. It was overwhelming. You couldn't be there anymore. You had to walk out just to get a moment, catch your breath, get some fresh air. So, in order for us to understand, wait, we close ourselves off because of all the pain and suffering. So the solution is compassion? Is that what you're saying? Before we can understand that, let's realize why some of us might really struggle to ever, even if we tried tomorrow to bear witness to suffering and pain in the world, it would not be good for us. It would not be good for us. So that means opening yourself up to reality as it is might actually be harmful for you given your current state. How is that possible? Let me explain. Let's go through a hypothetical scenario of a child being raised in a relatively healthy manner. Okay? Relatively speaking. Let's imagine what that might look like. This child, for example, would develop emotional literacy. This child would be able to understand, identify, and express their emotions safely. Okay? That would be part of, and I'm going to name a few more things. This would be a child who is not scared of their feelings, who's not ashamed of their feelings, who, comfortably experiences, feels, identifies, and expresses their emotions. On top of that, this child would have a secure connection to their caregivers and to the people around them. So they would have dependable relationships, consistent, where they're seen, they're soothed, they're supported. So they know that even if their emotions are overwhelming, they have people around them that will support them. They feel supported. As they get older, they are introduced to age-appropriate difficulties with, guidance. The term is scaffolding. You give them just a challenge one level above where they're at. You don't overwhelm them with something way too difficult because that just makes them feel incompetent. No, you give them, it's challenging. It's not easy for them, but it's within reach. You start introducing them to challenges. What's the right age to tell your children about the extent of the genocide in Gaza? What's the appropriate age? When can they handle it? Right? They need emotional stability for that. They need support when they feel overwhelmed that someone's there to hold them. That they don't just have to cry alone in their bed as they think about the children of Gaza. They need to have been exposed a little bit to challenges in the world and maybe a little bit of, heartbreak over their toy breaking and stuff like that to be ready for that level grief. No, you understand? You have to, because children grow up very innocent, and it's so we find it so beautiful and so um, wonderful the way they just walk around naive about the cold nature of the world. But eventually, we talk about them. We say they lose their innocence when the day comes inevitably where they come face to face with the world, with the idea that the world is not a fair place. It's not always fair. It's not always just. It's not always kind. That child comes face to face with these realities. And it's almost like the sparkle and the twinkle in their eyes disappears. You know what I'm talking about? As they're now maturing, someone bullies them, someone treats them a certain way, and they're just so confused. Now, these children usually, what do they struggle with? They struggle with making sense of that. Why are these terrible things happening in the world? How do I know they won't happen to me? Why do they happen at all? This is where the child needs to be given a moral/spiritual worldview for them to be able to process what happens in life. Because pain is difficult to bear, but meaningless pain is torture. And imagine a child who sees suffering around the world and has no framework within which to process it. Why is this happening? You don't believe in God. How do you make sense of why there's suffering? And why this world would even be worthy of living in this life worth living when there's such atrocities with no explanation? The child needs a moral framework, a spiritual framework. And so a healthy child would have that. And then the child would also be taught about boundaries and agency. So they would be taught what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. And they would have a voice that they could express and share what they think and feel about life and about themselves and their situations. Does this all make sense? Why all of this would be important? Why they would need all of this for them to be able to just look at the world, see the suffering, and be able to somewhat process it. Not that they'd be okay with it, not that it wouldn't bother them, but that they wouldn't be just completely overwhelmed, that they wouldn't retreat and go into a shell, that they could still move through life. They may have mood ups and downs, but they have good support systems. They have a framework to process it. They have their own understanding of their emotions. They're safe. They're secure in themselves and in their relationships with those around them. They feel supported. Such a child would likely grow up and would not flee from the first instance of pain and suffering, whether it's in the world or within themselves. Because remember, they were accustomed to facing hard challenges and overcoming. So they developed self-efficacy and they felt like, I can overcome. Now let's contrast that with how many of us experienced the world growing up. Number one, a lot of us dealt with emotional suppression. Meaning what? As you were growing up, when you noticed things that were painful, whether in your own life, whether seeing someone else, and you cried and you broke down, you were maybe told, stop crying. Why are you so sensitive? Get over it. It's really not that big of a deal. The child is being taught that how they feel is not important. Suppress it, numb it, don't feel it. And they're scared to then allow their emotions to really move them, because it means that I'm going to get rebuked and scolded if I express any emotions. And then what do you hear parents say sometimes? Such a good child. Such a good child. Never cries, never does anything. I don't know. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but not necessarily a good thing. Why is this child not expressing? They're a child. They should express. Now, they should be taught how to regulate, no doubt. But a lack of expression, yeah, it's more convenient for you as a parent because you don't have to deal with crying, but is it healthy for the child? So many of us were taught emotional suppression. Many of us were taught inconsistent or unsafe connection. So the people around us were unpredictable, volatile, emotionally unavailable, and you don't feel supported. It's very common to hear of children coming home and not telling their caregivers about their negative experiences. Because I don't know if they'll blame me. I don't know if they'll get mad at me. They'll say that, why did I do this? Why did I? So they keep it to themselves. But that leads to feeling very alone in the world. Or maybe some of us were very protected. We were shielded from all pain. We were not taught that the world is not exactly the perfect world that we might have thought it was. And so we weren't slowly introduced to age appropriate challenges. We never developed resilience. And so without the skills, little things would overwhelm us because we never developed that ability. We didn't know how to handle it. Some of us grew up without any framework for understanding suffering, for making sense of why there's pain in the world. Nobody ever really taught us why and how to think about it. Why every day when I'm at home are my parents getting mad at me or fighting with each other? And remember, when you don't have a meaning-making framework, you have to come up with your own explanations because you still need an answer to the why. You still need an answer to the why. When you see pain and suffering, you need to make sense of it. And imagine a young child, 6 years old, 7 years old, coming up with the best explanation that they can possibly come up with. What do you think it is? We'll talk about some. When a child's autonomy is overridden, they are micromanaged, they're made responsible for the parents' emotions. Do you want me to become upset? Do you want me to do this? Meaning you're in charge of my emotions. How you behave will dictate how I feel. The child feels like, wow, I need to really behave so that my parents are good. This is a reversal of order or a reversal of responsibility. And this child often grows up to be known as the parentified child. It's a term you might want to look into if any of you have ever experienced that, because you'll notice a lot of yourself in the parentified child. Now, imagine this child deprived of all of these safeties and securities as they're growing up. How do you face pain? How do you deal with pain? How do you even acknowledge suffering in the world? Because to do that is to be overwhelmed. You feel such strong emotions, you don't even know how to control them. One person put it this way. They said, when you have such strong emotions, but you don't know how to regulate and self-soothe, it's like you're driving a car only with access to the gas pedal. Like you don't have brakes. And so you're trying to slow down and stop, and you see your car going towards a what? A wall. And you take your foot off the gas, but you don't have the brakes. And you see yourself going, but you can't stop. And boom. You knew it the whole time, but you didn't have the ability to stop. Because emotionally you didn't know how to control yourself. You were never taught. In fact, you suppressed and numbed it, so it developed its own kind of way of functioning within you. And this is the same case when people know they shouldn't get angry, but they become angry. I don't know, Sheikh, I shouldn't have become upset, but I just did. Because you haven't learned to self-soothe. We're going to talk more about this, though. So, now this young child witnesses suffering, inevitably, witnesses pain, experiences pain. They have to make sense of it. They have to process it. So they come up with flawed interpretations. They develop flawed belief systems about the world. And underlying all of it, they deal with shame or fear or helplessness. What are the narratives that they tell themselves? And I'm building up towards compassion. The narratives they'll tell themselves are, it's my fault. So they default to self-blame. Any suffering, any pain in their own lives is attributed to themselves immediately. I caused it, I deserve it. It's my fault. right? Because we want to keep the parent as the perfect parent. They're adults. They brought me up. They brought me into the world. They've got to be perfect. They know what they're doing. They're full adults. So if anybody doesn't know what they're doing and is the problem, it's me, because I'm a little kid. And I don't even have a self concept yet, right? I don't actually know who I am yet. I don't have an identity. So I have nothing to fall back upon. If I have to choose who is wrong, me or my parents, it makes a lot more sense to say I am wrong. That's the best a child can come up with. It's my fault. When they see pain and suffering, the narrative is I'm not safe. I can't handle it. It overwhelms me. I cannot go near this. The world is a dangerous place. My feelings don't matter. If I feel pain, don't worry about it. Ignore it. Stuff it down. I have to handle this alone. We don't feel supported. So I got to deal with things myself. And that's an overwhelming feeling itself. Or nothing will change. This is just how it's going to be. I'm helpless. I can't change things. So now that we've kind of described two different possible ways of a child being brought up, and one having the capacity to bear difficulty, pain, suffering in the world, the other doesn't have it. Because they've come up with interpretations and belief systems that are deeply flawed. Because they're children. They don't have a better way to understand the world. So now they feel and experience shame, fear, and helplessness. And this makes it near impossible to live with heartfulness. Why? Because imagine the day you try to live openly and accept the world for what it is. What that means is that I must accept myself as a deeply flawed person. I'm not ready to do that. That's way too painful. Go back in. Fear. So now I want to get married. Man, the world is a dangerous place. People are deceptive. Back into my shell. I can't live. I can't, open myself up to the world. I feel helpless. If I feel helpless, then anything that goes wrong, I just don't even care about it because I can't do anything about it anyways. Forget it. I can't. Forget it. Just leave it. It is what it is. So you're not actually dealing with reality. You're just dealing with, I can't handle it, so I'm just going to shut myself down. I can't fix anything. No big deal. Life goes on. Anyone tries to offer help, there's no point. No point. I know you mean well, but there's no point. We can't do anything about this. Shut down. What opens someone up again to healing? It's compassion. And really, I'm going to explain it further, but it's no wonder, when we pause right here and think, it's no wonder that when Allah Ta'ala sent the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, He described him as rahmatan lil alameen, a mercy and a source of compassion for all of the worlds. Why? Because without the guidance that He brought, human beings were suffering. Women were treated as property. Young girls were buried alive. There was widespread oppression, tyranny of clans and tribes over others. There were no rights to people. The Arabs, to whom the Prophet ﷺ was sent, were known as barbarians, to the point that the Romans and the Persians didn't want to rule over them. They said, we can't deal with these people. And so there was suffering. In such chaotic, anarchist societies, there's widespread suffering. The Prophet ﷺ's being sent as a rahmah, as a mercy, was to come and put an end to the suffering. But remember, you don't put an end to suffering by ignoring it. This brings us to the definition of compassion. What is compassion? 1, it is a sensitivity to suffering. It is the willingness to look at suffering and say, yes, there is suffering. Not they deserve it. Why do we do that? Why do we see someone, a victim, oppressed, and you'll find people who have the audacity to look at them, yeah, probably shouldn't have dressed that way. Do you understand? How do you do that? How do you say that? How do you look a human, a full human being, and say that somehow they're responsible for someone else's beastly behavior? How? It's because the discomfort, you see suffering, it makes you feel really uncomfortable. And rather than say, this is injustice, this was a crime committed by a member of humanity on another, and we need to do something about this. Rather than that whole, we will try to uphold a just world fallacy. The world must be a just place. I don't want to believe that the world is unjust. So I'll say they must have done something to deserve it. Because I can't deal with the idea that, you know what, maybe unjust things happen. Because there's a false notion here, which is, hey, if I just do the right thing every time and I be just, nothing bad will happen to me. If I accept that this was a perfectly good person and they were unjustly treated, it leaves me susceptible to also having to accept maybe I might be unjustly treated. Just a fact. No one wants to face that fact. So let's find a way to make them different than me. They must have done something to deserve it, and I'll never do anything to deserve it. It's not going to happen to me. And people will blame victims because they cannot look at suffering and say, this is suffering. You can't do it. It's too painful. And I'm externalizing it, but we could talk about ourselves. What about the difficulty and the pain we have within? We won't even face it. We won't face it. The things that we're insecure about, the things that we know are not true, the masks that we're wearing, we don't want to accept it. So we focus on the world outside. We blame ourselves. We come up with narratives. Yeah, it's just who I am. I can't do anything about it. Compassion starts with just facing the pain. Yeah, I do feel very insecure about this. Yeah, that person did hurt me. Like I am susceptible to being hurt. Yeah, that person has led me to no longer trust people. Yes, I accept it. You accept and you face the suffering. And we don't think of compassion like that usually. We don't realize that compassion involves not sidestepping and ignoring and shoving it under the carpet, but facing the suffering. So it takes immense courage. For someone to be compassionate requires immense courage. Because you have to have a sensitivity to suffering. The Prophet ﷺ had this. He wasn't someone who turned a blind eye because it's too uncomfortable. I'm going to say something very difficult, but I hope you can bear this. There are times where children will come to their parents and complain about the wrong that was done to them, and the parent will not take action. The parent will shove it under the carpet. Will say something like, well, maybe it's your fault. Why? And they'll blame the child. Or they'll say, okay, whatever, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And just kind of act like nothing happened. Why? Because they lack the moral courage to face the suffering. And they have flawed narratives too, where they come up with, I should have protected them. So if I accept that they're suffering, it means I didn't do my job, which makes me a bad parent. So I don't want to accept that because that's painful. So I'm going to pin it back on the child. Or act like it never happened. I'm still a great parent. You're still my child. Let's go on with life. Let's act like whatever happened, happened, and there's no consequences. Because they lack moral courage to face suffering and say, this is suffering. The Prophet ﷺ is described in the Quran as someone, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, that indeed a messenger has come to you from among yourselves. Allah says, عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ. The difficulties that you face weigh heavily on him. He allowed it to weigh on him because he faced it. We won't allow it to weigh on us. Sometimes we don't have capacity. We haven't healed enough to even just face the pain. If you try to face the pain too early, you'll break down. You'll be overwhelmed. You'll get angry. You'll hate the person who tries to come and highlight the pain. You'll see them to be the problem because you're just not ready to face it. So the first ingredient to compassion is what? Having a sensitivity to suffering. And what now separates it from empathy is that the individual now has a motivation to alleviate or prevent the suffering. There's a desire to take action. Empathy is merely when you can see someone in pain and you can feel it. Cognitive empathy or affective empathy, right? You understand it, you can kind of even feel it a little bit in your body. That's the first step for compassion. Compassion goes one step further and says, I don't just understand that you're suffering. I now have this deep urge and desire to put an end to the suffering. It's not pity either, by the way, because pity is condescending. No one is asking, and no one is saying you will heal through pity. Pity is you look at someone and you're kind of like, poor person, poor soul, you know? But then you create distance between you and them, like, oh yeah, us? Oh no, we're not alike. This person, poor person, right? It comes from a place of superiority, like, poor you. Yeah, me, I'm good, like, because I'm a good person. You, I feel bad for you. That's pity. Pity does not heal, right? Pity does not heal. We're talking about compassion here. Sensitivity to suffering and a desire. We need to alleviate that suffering. Now, someone might say, hey, if you are sensitive to suffering and you see it, well, of course you're going to put an end to it. Right? Isn't that going to be an automatic response? You see suffering and you're like, okay, we need to do something about it? No, it is not an automatic response. In fact, people can choose not to take action because it's more convenient by blaming the person again, by blaming the victim, by telling themselves, well, I'm doing pretty good this until now, so there's no need to really work on anything. I know there's some stuff wrong, but like, forget about it. Not acknowledging the extent to which they're harming people. And so they can't create enough, if people can't create enough gap between them and the suffering to say, look, what can I do to help right now? If they're sucked into it and it's just overwhelming them, yeah, they probably won't take action. They won't know what to do. Before they can even start thinking about what to do, they'll just feel too overcome. I want to highlight 5 levels of compassion here now. Gabor Mate highlights these 5 levels. And I think it's very powerful when we think about how when we embody this, it is the foundation for a lot of healing, which then enables you to face suffering and do something about it. At the bare minimum, in your own life. In your own life. Let alone the world around you. Because some of us, we are shut off and not living heartfully. We're shut off from ourselves. We don't want to face ourselves. We don't want to be alone. We don't want to talk about ourselves. If anyone brings the spotlight on us in the convo, no, let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about UFC. Let's talk about something. Let's not talk about me. No, we can't do that. It's too painful. All right? So we're not ready to face ourselves. What happened to us? What we did. We don't want to talk about it. So we're not ready to face it. And so we need some compassion, starting with that willingness to face the suffering. Okay. Level number 1 is what we might call just ordinary human compassion. That's that basic empathy. This is the equivalent of empathy. It's the instinctive response that you feel when you see someone else's suffering. Right? So you see someone at work, coworker sitting at their desk crying. You don't just walk by. If someone just walks by and goes, yeah, let's not get into that, because it makes them uncomfortable to see someone crying. And then I'll have to do something about it. I don't know if I can do anything. Let's act like we never saw anything. No. Someone who demonstrates this first level will come and say, hey, are you okay? That's foundational. You know what goes against this very first level? what we might call in our culture toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is another way that people will refuse to acknowledge suffering, right? It's a way to refuse to acknowledge suffering. Someone says, "Man, I lost my job." No big deal, man. Let's go for coffee. Excuse me. What is happening here? But the person doesn't want to deal with the pain and to empathize with it. So they're going to, yeah, no big deal. Yeah, it's fine. And they're going to spin it off as though they're just being optimistic. Yeah, I'm just a really upbeat person. No, you're an emotionally avoidant person. You can't face the suffering in front of you. So you pass it off like you're upbeat. Because if you face it, it's not comfortable. And you haven't learned to sit with that discomfort. So you pivot. Toxic positivity leads to what? Shaming people. You're essentially telling this person, it's not a big deal. Trivialize your pain. It's not that serious. Why are you being, you're essentially telling them they're being too sensitive. It's fine, just move on. Right? You make them feel guilty for feeling the negative emotion. Why can't you just be positive like me? It's very, very performative. Because it's not real. Inside, the individual sees suffering, feels discomfort, does not like it, masks it with what? Positivity. Right? And then you can't grow from there. Because if you're not willing to acknowledge the suffering and do something about it, you can't grow. It's just going to sit there while you try to, positively move forward in life. You can't. And so what do you need then? The second level of compassion, which is compassionate inquiry, right? The compassion of curiosity. Can you bear the suffering long enough to become curious about the suffering there? Why is it? So that coworker's crying at their desk. You say, "Hey, are you okay?" And they're like, "No, I'm not." Like, do you say, "Can I get you some tissues? Should I bring you something?" And then walk off? Because you're too scared. What if you ask them what happened and they start telling you something really painful, and now you have to sit with that? But that's where that curiosity comes from. And we might just tell ourselves what? Narratives. This person's just so sensitive. No point sitting there and asking them what's wrong. We come up with narratives about why we shouldn't care about them. Yeah, they're always crying. Yeah, the manager was saying they're a bit difficult. Yeah, that's probably why they're crying. But imagine we sit, we say, "Hey, what's going on?" And we're curious to understand why it is that they're going through what they're going through. Imagine you could pause long enough with your own pain inside to just face it long enough that you could say, "Wait, why do I feel this pain? Why do I feel so guilty? Why do I always feel like God hates me? Why do I feel this? Why am I scared to go do this? Why, when someone says something, I immediately interpret it this way?" You become curious. What do we do instead? We become judgmental. I feel negative emotion. Oh, I'm so weak. I need to be tougher than this. I feel negative emotion, and I tell myself, "Come on, people have bigger problems in the world, okay? Like, there are people suffering, living in tents, and you want to make a big deal out of something like, that happened at work today? Come on, be grateful. You have a job. There are people who don't have food." And you just shame yourself into like, let's not explore. I can't bear the suffering. But imagine you could pause and say, "Wait, I wonder why this is the case. Why am I doing that? Why am I choosing to respond this way? Maybe I'm not even choosing. Why did I learn that this is the best way to respond? What's the narrative I'm telling myself about this?" A lot of us, we make mistakes, and afterwards we feel ashamed and we feel guilty. And then we just shame ourselves into like, don't do it again. It didn't work the last 100 times you tried to shame yourself. It's probably not going to work going forward. Maybe adopt a different approach. Maybe pause and say, "Wait, why do I keep making this mistake? At some level, it seems to make sense to me that this is the right thing to do. Why? What am I trying to address through it?" And you become curious and you start to really understand that you're not as irrational or "I should have known better." Like, that's not going to be a valid reason why you're doing what you're doing. There's a reason why people do what they do. There's a reason. And people will tell them I'm insane. Like I'm crazy. I just do stuff. No, there's a reason. Almost always there's a reason. We're just not curious enough to find out what that reason is. And if you can understand that people have reasons, you don't just write them off and go, they don't care. Or they're just very this. We label them and then we just kind of put them aside. No, you pause. And you need to have this quality, by the way. If you ever want to work in any capacity serving others and working with them, you have to be able to see beyond their behavior to see their suffering. It's the only way you can uphold unconditional positive regard. Otherwise, you can't. If you can look beyond what the person's doing and their circumstance to see what led them to this. Why did they think that this was the best course of action? As incorrect as it may be, but somewhere in their mind, the narrative told them this is the right thing to do. Why? What is that narrative? What's going on? We can ask ourselves that question. Then we move to the compassion of recognition. How do you avoid pitying someone? When you start to identify yourself in them. And I tell you, it is one of the most humbling experiences. I recall there was a time, a couple of years ago, I used to go visit a prison to give talks to the Muslims there. And I remember, subhanAllah, after a little while, I was like, man, there really isn't that much difference between us. Like they seem just like me. And at first it's a little bit troubling because you're like, we have this idea. Think about it. We subconsciously probably have this notion that the people in prison are just terrible people. That's why they're there. And I'm not a terrible person, so I won't be there. And when you come face to face and you listen to their aspirations and their dreams and their yearning to go out and meet with their children and be with their children and take them for a walk to the park, you just sit there and go, that's what I want to do. There's not that much difference. And this is another level of compassion. Because now you don't just see them as a victim of their circumstances. You see yourself in them and you can relate more and go, well, I know what it's like to feel how they feel. And now you're personally invested because you can't just tell yourself, well, yeah, they're just different, so they got to figure it out. You're like, they're just like me. And if I were in their shoes, what would I want? How would I want to handle this? And subhanAllah, it's such a powerful moral approach to take. To ask yourself the question, not what's wrong with them that they did that, but what circumstances or belief system led them to believe that that was the right course of action. And if you really apply that, you can almost see a level of compassion for almost anybody. It doesn't mean you think what they're doing is right. It doesn't mean you're justifying their behavior or thinking that they're totally okay with how they are. But you're able to see some glimmer of sense to their behavior. And then you have something to work with. You know, one person says this. One writer, they write, the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. You're not compassionate because you just feel bad about someone. You're compassionate because you recognize there's shared humanity here. Right? There's shared humanity. Number 4 is the compassion of truth. SubhanAllah. Now, this is a powerful one. Compassion, we're talking here about facing what is true. Because look, someone's suffering. You see them suffering. You get curious about it. And sometimes they're blind to certain truths. So imagine I see someone, they're in a lot of pain. I empathize. I come to them. I say, hey, what's going on? They said, my parents, I had a big fight with them. Da 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 da. I'm such a terrible person. I'm a failure. I'm this. I'm that. They beat themselves up. I look at them. I'm like, yeah, there was a time in my life, in my head, I'm like, I was kind of like that too. But imagine I go, but I need to tell them the truth. I need to tell them that their parents were abusive. That's the truth. And it takes compassion to say it. Because they might get offended. They might get upset. But they need to face the truth. It's the only way that they will. And initially, when people have never given that consideration, it's one of the most far-fetched things that they can imagine. My parents? No, they're perfect. Everyone likes them. They could not be wrong. And you're trying to tell them, no. Objectively, based on what you're describing, this is abuse. No, my parents, no. Like, they're such righteous, pious people. Everyone sees them praying all the time. They recite Quran. They can't be bad people. We're not saying they're bad people. We're just saying these behaviors are abuse. And it's so hard for individuals. No. You know what? You're just trying to split up our family. You're sitting there compassionately going, I got to tell you the truth though. That's why people think therapy is about someone just kind of enabling you. Everything you say, they go, yeah, of course. Yes, you're right. Yes, they're wrong. They're toxic. Cut them off. That's a terrible therapist. With all due respect, if you have a therapist like that, you need to stop. Right? Get reimbursement from your insurance or something. It's a terrible therapist. That's not what a therapist is supposed to do. Just enable your behavior. No. A therapist has to have the moral courage in the moment, with compassion, with safety, to tell you the truth. And it's not easy, because you might lose a client. Someone will stop coming back, but you have to say it. And you have to risk it, because they came to you for help. A good therapist will tell you what you need to hear, even when you're like, that's the last thing you want to hear. They'll work with you to get you to a point where you're ready to hear it. But in that critical moment, they'll say it, and you'll hesitate to accept, and that's your battle you have to fight, but they will say it because they're compassionate. They will not say it to hurt you. They will say it because they know that's what compassion demands, to speak the truth. And the final level of compassion is that not only do you see a person for where they are, you see them for their potential. The compassion of possibility. It's you see someone suffering and you say, what? They're suffering, yes. But they don't have to be suffering. They actually have a lot of potential. And oftentimes they don't see potential in themselves. All they see is their own flaws, their own mistakes, because they haven't faced some truths. You help them face truths, they face them, and now finally they have a way forward because they finally accepted that they're not the problem. Their parents' behavior was objectively abusive. That friend who did that did betray them. It's real. They weren't being gaslit. No. So whatever it is, they face the truth. It gives them a way forward. And when they have a way forward, they need to see possibilities. And someone who sees, a future, someone who sees potential in you is one of the most empowering people. Who shows you the way forward, says, you know what, you have this trait, you can do this. Look, you just did that over there with that person. You sat with them, look. And they're like, you know what, maybe I can do this. Someone actually believes in it. I doubt myself, but hey, this person's a pretty smart person, so if they believe it, maybe there's some truth to it. This is a level of compassion. And when someone is able to embody compassion with others, and then ultimately with themselves, they don't run away from suffering. They don't run away. They face it. And they don't blame. They don't run. They're ready to change their narratives if they're false. They face truth, right? And that's where so much healing takes place, and they're willing to open themselves up to life. A narrative some of us are telling ourselves right now is that God hates me. And if God hates me, Why would I ever open up myself to the spiritual realities that God is watching me? I'm going to do my best to ignore that. If I think God hates me, I'm going to do my best to ignore God in my life. Right? Is that not what any logical person would do? Someone hates you, you don't go to them, you don't think about them, you avoid them. Maybe I'm avoiding prayer, not because I'm lazy or bad iman, because I think that because of my shame, God hates me. I'm a terrible person that's not redeemable. Maybe that's what it is. So, I'm going to finish with one quote, inshallah, and we're done. The writer says, compassion hurts. Right? Compassion hurts. When you feel connected to everything, you also feel responsible for everything, and you can't turn away. Your destiny is bound with the destinies of others. You must either learn to carry the universe or be crushed by it. You must grow strong enough to love the world, yet empty enough to sit down at the same table with its worst horrors. That is, our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the most compassionate of people. Yeah, he cried night after night. He was concerned about people. The Quran would console him repeatedly. Don't destroy yourself in agony and grief over these people, yet, O Prophet. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to be people of compassion. Next week, inshallah, we'll spend some time exploring in a more, spiritually informed way, compassion and how we might navigate that. آمين يا رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. Thank you to all of you for coming out. Next week, inshallah, will be our last week in this series, inshallah. And then we'll switch to a new series after that, inshallah. And that will run till Ramadan. Anyone who has to go, obviously, it's 9/11. The time is 9/11. If you need to go, you can go. If anyone has questions, I understand the topic is a little technical. Anything that people are confused about, I'll try to answer. We'll take about 4 or 5 minutes for that. Anyone? Yeah. A 100%. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's restricted to spiritual growth, though definitely it does apply to spiritual growth. If you don't see that there's potential within you, the effort's not worth it then. Why would you ever try to grow if you don't ever see it possible that you could ever become that? And a lot of us don't put the effort in because we don't see that compassion of possibility. And so compassion is a very powerful thing. It's not lying, it's not toxic positivity, it's actually the very opposite. It's coming face to face. But not allowing that suffering and pain to jade you. And people become jaded when either they don't have capacity to bear the emotional toll or they don't have a way to process it. This is why people in pain turn to religion. Because religion gives them a framework to process why there's suffering, why they are suffering. It's literally a meaning-making machine. That's what religion is. And so people turn and they find great comfort and healing in it because it's they're finally able to face the suffering, and it's not senseless suffering. There's meaning to it. That's actually the next series, inshallah. So yeah. Recognition, the compassion of recognition. You see yourself in the person, right? Because then you don't think something's wrong with them, because you're like, wait, I have a very similar right, like I've experienced that too in a different way. Right? Someone comes, they're dealing with an addiction. Okay, you don't deal with that addiction, but you've had moments where you gave in to a trigger or something. So now you can kind of go, I see where you're coming from. I feel your pain. Yeah, and now I'm motivated to work with you because it's personal. If someone's like dealing with something, you're like, I don't know what that is. Good luck. You just further alienated them, right? Because they think they're now definitely something's wrong with them. Yeah. I think people do have the ability though. Like no matter how much they're stunted or struggling, there's capacity there. If given the right care, conditions, they can grow. Um, but yeah, you're right. There are going to be some people who naturally just have more resilience. The threshold for when they get overwhelmed is much, mashallah, um, higher. What's the right statistical term here? Threshold's higher, right? Yeah, not lower. Um, yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah. But that's supposing that you identify with the hero, because you might identify with the villain. You're like, yo, that's me, right? Voldemort, that's me, yo. Like, I mean, it's not helpful then, right? Because they're just furthering their. No, I know what you're saying though. Yeah, it can be very helpful. As long as someone sees themselves good enough to identify with the hero, because sometimes people don't. They really don't see themselves worthy and good enough and deserving. Yeah, you're going to be affected. Yeah, you can't. This is not a hack to not feel the pain. No, you actually fully feel the pain and you face it and you go through it rather than trying to ignore it. That's what this is. But it's possible to face the pain, feel it fully, and still move forward in a way that aligns with your values. When we don't move through the pain and face it and like really, you know, be compassionate with ourselves in that moment and with that person, we can end up acting from the pain and then we cause more pain. You can learn to not necessarily you forgive, but you don't forget. And forgiveness, by the way, let's clarify forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean you never did anything harmful to me. It's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness means, yes, you did harm me, but I will not hold you accountable in the day of judgment. That's forgiveness. And then you don't have to forget. You don't have to, like, yeah, it didn't happen. Because I think some of us think that. They think if I say, I forgive you, it's like you didn't hurt me. That's not what forgiveness means. No. When you forgive, we're saying, yes, you did hurt me, but I will not hold you accountable on the day of judgment. That's what forgiveness means, in a spiritual sense at least. Does that make sense? But you should not forget. Yeah. It's not good to forget what people do to you. It doesn't mean you have to hold it against them, but you need to be careful how you trust and how you navigate. 100%. Yeah. I think someone had their hand in the back. Let me just take it. You're trying to show compassion to someone and they're not responding, you're saying? Yeah, it's a painful reality when you care is you can't help somebody who won't receive help. You do your best And it's a reality that sometimes people aren't ready. So sometimes it's like a waiting game, you know? I've seen that. I've seen someone had like a moment where they kind of, things didn't go well. I advised them. They're like, "Yeah, I need to fix up." I guess things got better. They went back to their old ways, and then it really fell apart. And then it's like they came sincerely. "You're right. Last time you told me I didn't do it properly, but now I think I really need it." And then it's like then they were ready to be more receptive. So yeah, it is the this will teach you about savior mentality and really teach you to like tame it, because otherwise you eat yourself up. And it hurts though. That's why compassion hurts, Subhanallah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so someone who grew up with a healthy household and all those, factors that I described that are all healthy, they usually are able to front suffering. They can face it because they have resources to bear it. Everything's there. So they can also then be compassionate. They can be compassionate and they may not, I'm not saying they don't require it as much, but they can face suffering and live wholeheartedly. Because what are they scared of? Nothing. Any fear, any pain comes their way, they have resources to deal with it. But someone who grew up not receiving all that support and love and emotional literacy, they shell up because they don't have resources to deal with the pain, so they just avoid the pain. But then you don't live wholeheartedly. So how do you open up? They need compassion. How do you become more compassionate towards yourself? Yeah, you can do it. Absolutely. In fact, as you're older, you have more ability to do it. Because when you're younger, you don't know better. Or sometimes for some people, the pain is too much. But one of the most powerful ways is if you encounter someone who is compassionate. There, this is. You ever heard this term, lead with presence? Someone who themselves is relatively healthy and stable, well-being wise, their presence will precede them. When you sit with them, there's this really interesting calming presence, and that has an incredible impact on you as a person, because you're all shelled up and you sit with someone and you're like, "Oh, there's no attacks coming my way, this is a very safe place." So you kind of, okay, and then you kind of let yourself be seen, you say some things, you share some things, and the person doesn't shoot you down, and you're kind of like, "Oh, okay." And you have the comfort. That's what a good therapist can do, right? Is to offer that presence where you sit with them and you just kind of, you're not so shelled up, you open up. It's profound if you experience it, really. That's why being a therapist is not as simple as just getting a job and like doing certification. It's embodiment. And that's why a therapist is only as good as the self work and inner work they do themselves. Yeah, absolutely. Get your hand up. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Jazakallah. Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. MashaAllah. Khair inshallah. All right, guys. Let's have a good night. And we'll see you next week, inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.